Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Ezekiel chapter 15, or actually chapter 14, I'm sorry. God makes an astounding statement. He says, if because of the wickedness of a nation, I decide to judge that nation because of their wickedness. And I think we always have to kind of preference that because God is the one who sets the standards. I say that because we live in a society, a world where one, God is slandered and mischaracterized. So when you think of, when people ask, well, why did God let this happen? Right? So just finish the sentence. Why did God let this happen? Dot dot dot. Well, what happened? Well, my mother died of cancer. My child got run over by a car. Tornadoes hit. Tsunamis hit. Hurricanes destroyed, our land. 9/11, right? We can go on and on. Why did God let this happen? But they always forget the starting point is wickedness. You can say the result of man's sin. I mean, so sometimes there are answers that are easily answered, like, well, why did 9/11 happen? Well, the bigger question is, why did God let 9/11 happen? Well, sometimes the arrogance of man. Why did God let the Titanic hit the iceberg? And so the starting point of the question is wrong because you go back to the arrogance of man. That you start from the very building of the ship. That they claimed the ship couldn't be sunk, but what they call the watertight walls, which were supposed to seal off the walls, right? They didn't even make them high enough. Now, Matt, look at the screen right here. If you look at the screen, imagine that's the Titanic, and they only made them up like to this point here. So the water just raised up and spilled over into the other compartments. So that arrogance. And then they didn't stock lifeboats for everybody to save everybody because the ship was unsinkable. So that was the arrogance of man. Then ignoring all of the ice warnings. So all of that is that, when you say, well, why did God allow it to happen? Because again, start with the arrogance of man. So the problem is that then who was on the boat? So those who were on the boat suffered because of the arrogance of man. Okay, so there were women and children on the boats who perished because of the biases of upper class people. Right, they got all of the first class people off, but the women and children. But then if you were lower class, then even the women and children didn't get on the boats. And then, of course, not everybody filled the boat. We can go on and on, right? 9/11. Why did 9/11 happen? Did not our intelligence communities knew what was being planned? And then, of course, even doing, so then you say, well, why did all of those attacks happen on that day? Well, okay, the point is we knew. So then the people suffered because of that. Excuse me. So we always we ask the wrong questions, right? Why did God allow suffering? Well, so he's mischaracterized, and we have to preface it by saying that if God says, I'm going to destroy a nation because of their wickedness, let's start with because of their wickedness. And what was astounding, he said, well, even if Noah and Daniel and Job were in the land, I wouldn't spare the land. I would deliver them. I would deliver them. But the rest of y'all is toast. Which also brings us to how bad they were. That even if Noah and Daniel and Job was in there, and let's just put like this, let's kind of go a step further. If they were all in there at the same time, God said, no, I get them out. But it shows you how wicked the Israelites were, that even those great men could not save them. God would not save them. Now, I said this last time about when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And when, you know what, let's do a side, let's do a little side, oh, I'm almost there too. Oh, okay. So this is when Abraham prays for Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm just going to read it real fast, but so this is Genesis chapter 18, verse 16 says, the men got up from there and looked out over Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to see them all. Then the Lord said, Should I hide what I'm about to do from Abraham? Abraham is to become a great and powerful nation, and all nations of the earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. This is how the Lord will fulfill to Abraham what he has promised. The Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is immense, and their sin is extremely serious. I will go down to see if what they have done justifies the cry which has come up to me. And if not, I will find out. The men turned and went towards Sodom. While Abraham was remaining standing before the Lord, Abraham stepped forward and said, Will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Now, God probably could have said, I never said anything about the righteous. All right. But anyway, he said, verse 24, he says, What if there is 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away instead of sparing the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people who are in it? Now, that's an interesting statement right here now, right? Especially when you see a lot of evangelicals, conservatives, always pronouncing, America's doom, right? Or something like that. But notice God's reply. Now, look, he said, you could not possibly do such a thing to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. You could not possibly do that. Won't the judge of all the earth do what is just? Now listen to the statement. Then the Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Solomon, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Now, the conversation goes back and forth because I don't know if Abraham was thinking, wait a minute, maybe there's not 50 people. So he said, what about 45? God said, I'll spare the place for 45. Oh, and he goes all the way down to 10. And then he says, look at verse number 23. He says, then he said, let the Lord not be angry, and I will speak one more time. Suppose 10 are found there. Notice this. He answered, I will not destroy it on the count of the 10. In other words, God was going to spare, notice this, the entire city of Sodom and Gomorrah for the 10 righteous people. That's interesting right there. That's why it's always funny to me when I hear people decry that God's going to destroy America because, America is not living up to the conservative ideology. So conservative talking points, Racism is fine, but let's talk about abortion and gay rights. But I digress. I will say this, there are more than 10 righteous people in America. And notice what he says here. This is God saying, I will spare the city on their account. I will spare the city on their account. Now, this is interesting because now God is saying here, I won't even spare it if Job and it was in the city. I'm still going to destroy it. Notice that. He says, if I look at verse 12 again. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, if a land sins against me by acting faithlessly, and I stretch out my hand against it to cut off its supply of bread, to send famine through it, and to wipe out both man and animal from it, even if these three, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would deliver only themselves by their righteousness. That is the declaration of the Lord. So, in other words, it is so bad for them that God is saying, I'm just going to remove them out. I'm not going to spare the city. Now, we saw that Sodom and Gomorrah would have been spared if they found 10 righteous people. They couldn't even find 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. But notice, they would have been spared But he's saying here, okay, uh, even if and it's not only righteous men, but these righteous men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, amazing. So Daniel is a contemporary, as I said, that's living in real time with Ezekiel, and his deeds, no doubt by now, are known. Like everybody knows Daniel. All right. Uh, this this statement is so amazing to me. And not secondly, that God mentions him. Now, just so you know, here's another thought here. Noah at this time probably would have been dead somewhere around the 1500, and then Job maybe 2000. And I'm saying that because notice how God refers to them, in a sense, in the present. That they are alive, not alive physically, but they're not, even though we say they're dead, they're not non-existent. Again, amazing. Amazing. All right, verse 15 says, if I allow dangerous animals to pass through the land and depopulate it so that it becomes desolate, with no one passing through it for fear of the animals. Let's stop for example. Let's stop for a moment. When we think about dangerous animals, and there's a lot of them, why? Just think if all God has to do is, like, again, nothing, right? Think about this. God. We can say dogs, right? We think about a little pit bull, where that pit bull could weigh 80, 90 pounds, but it got a lot of bite, right? The power in its bite. But just think snakes, bears, tigers, the list could go on. In fact, I'm reminded of a television series that came out a few years ago called Zoo, and in it, all of the animals all around the world just all of a sudden became like conscious and rebelled against man, and it didn't go well with man. And they were wondering why all of a sudden the wild animals were turning on it. I mean, like the lions and the bears and stuff, and everybody, like the animals in the zoos, were turning on them and getting free. The animals, the monkeys, everybody, all the animals just turned. But just think if that happened now. So just think about it. Why isn't it happening today? And if you go back to what God said, that He will put the fear of animals under the rule of man. That the animals will be under the rule of man. So if God, notice this, if I allow dangerous animals, so which means, or which tells us that the reason why it's not happening is because God is not allowing it. So he says, if I allow dangerous animals to pass through the land and depopulate it so that it becomes desolate, with no one passing through it for fear of the animals, he says, even if these three men were in it, as I live, the declarations of the Lord, they could not deliver their sons and daughters. They alone would be delivered, but the land would be desolate. Now that's another thing when he says Job's sons. Daniel was not married, but Noah, and then of course, so he could be referring to not only their physical daughters, which Daniel did not have. He was actually Daniel was a eunuch. But then also, of course, figuratively, the sons and daughters of the land. But notice what he's saying though. He said they alone would be delivered. In other words, only the righteous. But also say too, we could say that the righteous, there's something about the righteousness, and I'll come back to that. But and that's what it's stressing. So the point is that then what the assumption here is that his sons and daughters, if they are wicked, living wicked, He says, or if I bring a sword against the land and say, let the sword pass through it, meaning war, so that I wipe out both man and animals from it. Even if these 3 men were in it as I live, the declaration of the Lord, they could not deliver their sons and daughters, but they alone would be delivered. Or if I send a plague into the land and pour out my wrath on it, with the bloodshed to wipe out both man and animals from it. Even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it as I live, the declaration of the Lord, they could not deliver their sons and daughters. They would only deliver themselves, now get this, by their righteousness. For this is what the Lord says, how much worse will it be when I send my 4 devastating judgments against Jerusalem? Now keep this in mind. The war had began against Israel and Nebuchadnezzar was closing in. Ezekiel and Daniel were one of the first and second deportations. But at this time, Jerusalem hadn't fallen. Okay. For this is what the Lord says, how much worse will it be when I send my 4 devastating judgments against Jerusalem, sword, famine, dangerous animals, and the plague, in order to wipe out both man and animals from it. Even so, there would be survivors left in it, sons and daughters who will be brought out. Indeed, they will come out to you, and you will observe their conduct and actions. Then you will be consoled about the devastation that I have brought upon Jerusalem. It says, then you'll be consoled about the devastation that I have brought on Jerusalem, about all I have brought on it. And they will bring you consolation when you see their conduct and action, and you will know that it was not without cause that I have done what I did to it. And this is the declaration of the Lord. Now, it's really a sad case about Israel that this is even being said like this. I said this, that oftentimes when God is mischaracterized, not, trust me, you're not hurting God by mischaracterizing him, but sometimes we say that and we say, well, how is it that the Lord is doing this to us? How is it that the Lord can let this happen? And remember, whenever you hear that statement from people, they always say it without talking about the wickedness. In other words, the starting point should be, just like here, what God has said. Now, I'm telling you, all of what's happening to Israel, you start with the wickedness. And that's why it says that even if Noah and Daniel and Job were in it, they would just be removed. The starting point always is the wickedness. And when you look at man right now, the wickedness of man. How wicked how wicked are we, and how wicked are we, the more it's increasing in our wickedness. Now, again, I want to remind you of the term righteousness, because he said their righteousness. They will be delivered by their righteousness. And one of the things about this, remember, righteousness is being in right standing with God. Jesus is our right standing. That is our saving factor alone. Okay? Our saving factor alone. In fact, let me go to that quickly before I close out here. And that is 1 John chapter 2. And it says, listen, he said, my little children, I am writing these things so that you may not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. he himself is the propitiation for our sins, and not only for our and not only for ours, not only for ours, but also for those of the whole world. Okay. So the word propitiation means the satisfaction for sin. In other words, if you ask the question, what satisfy? Who is God satisfied with? What action? Is he satisfied with your doing good? And let me just cut to the chase. The answer is no, he's not. You could never satisfy that, but Jesus is. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.